Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the licensing panel today. Before we start, can I just provide you all with a short, brief safeguarding message and health and safety. You know where the exits are. Follow me because I'll be first out the door. They are over there, and as you know, the toilets are round to the right. And I would like to ask you all to keep your microphones on if you wish to speak, and then turn them off when finished. We are now live streaming, and we're definitely going, aren't we, Julie? Item 1, minutes. To ask members if they are happy to agree the minutes and all in favour of the minutes, or if there is any comments on those of the previous meeting. All in favour? Thank you. Apologies, Julie, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I have apologies from Councillor Duffield, Councillor Kittle-Morris and Councillor Morton.
And I have no further apologies. So urgent business, I have nothing coming. Have you got anything, Josie? No. No further urgent business. Number 4, declarations of interests. To ask members if they have any declarations to declare in items in respect of the agenda. No? Lovely, thank you. Number 5, any members in attendance wishing to address the meeting? We do not have any. Oh, we have Gordon. Hello, Gordon. Do you want to say anything at this point? Or not at this point. No, okay, thank you, Gordon. We don't have any other members of the public here, so I'll move straight on to number 6. Taxi licence fees and Hackney carriage fares. And could I ask Josie, the licensing team leader, to give us her report, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the purpose of today's meeting is to seek the approval from the Licensing Committee on the revised taxi licensing fees and Hackney carriage fares following the consultation. On the 12th of January 2022, the Licensing Committee agreed to go out to consultation on the proposed Hackney carriage fares and the taxi licensing fees, as the last increase in both areas had occurred in 2015. The consultations on both have taken place, and the committee now needs to review the responses and approve the final fees and fares and the date each will come into effect. The Hackney carriage fares are from the Town and Police Clauses Act 1847 and the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976 under Section 65, which allows local authorities to set and review Hackney carriage fares. Breckland Council have elected to set or vary a table of fares. Under the above acts, the council may only set a maximum fare level. The fare shown on the meter is the maximum that may be charged. If drivers wish to charge less than the maximum, that is an arrangement between themselves and the hirer. The taxi licensing fees are from Section 70 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976, which allows a district council to charge such fees for the grant of vehicle and operator licenses as may be sufficient in the aggregate to cover in whole or in part the reasonable cost of carrying out inspections on private hire and Hackney carriage vehicles for the determination of granting or renewing a licence, the reasonable costs of providing Hackney carriage stands, and any reasonable administrative costs with the grant, renewal and control and supervision of Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles. For comparison, the current Hackney carriage fare chart is attached as Appendix A, and the proposed new tables of Hackney carriage fares is attached as Appendix B. The current taxi licence fees are attached as Appendix C, and the proposed taxi licence fees are attached as Appendix D. The trade has been contacted via email and letter on the 14th of January 2022. Just to clarify, those who didn't have email were contacted by letter. Not everybody. If they had email, they were contacted by email. That was to seek their views on the proposed increases in Hackney carriage fares and the taxi licensing fees. A copy of the letter is attached as Appendix E. The consult directly with the trade closed on the 25th of January 2022, and we published a public notice for the taxi fees on the 14th of February and on the 1st of March for the Hackney carriage fares. The closing date for comments was the 14th of March 2022 on both of those. The public notices were advertised in the Eastern Daily Press on those dates, and published public notices have been displayed at the council offices here in Dereham. 14 responses were received from the trade for consideration by the committee. These are attached as Appendix F. No comments or objections were received from the public. Hackney Carriage Fares, the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1976, Section 65(4) states, if objection is duly made as aforesaid and is not withdrawn, the District Council shall set a further date not later than 2 months after the first specified date on which the table of fares shall come into force, with or without modifications as decided by them after consideration of the objections. Fees for vehicle and operator licences. The Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976, Section 75 states, if objection is duly made as aforesaid and is not withdrawn, the District Council shall set a further date, not later than 2 months after the first specified date, on which the variation shall come into force, with or without modification as decided by the District Council after consideration of the objections. Objections have been made and not withdrawn on both the Hackney Carriage Fares and the vehicle and operator fees. So the committee must consider the objections and set a further date, no later than 2 months after the 1st of April 2022, on which the table of fares and the fee shall come into force, with or without modifications. So options available to the committee are on the Hackney Carriage Fares, make no changes to the proposed table of fares and approve and set a date for the new Hackney Carriage Fares to come into force, or make modification to the proposed table of fares and approve and set a date for the new Hackney Carriage Fares to come into force. And on the taxi licence fees, make no changes to the proposed taxi licence fees and approve and set a date for the new fees to come into force, or make modification to the proposed taxi licence fees and approve and set a date for the new taxi licence fees to come into force. So the reasons for the recommendations are that now that the formal notification and consultation has taken place, the council must decide on the fees and fares in accordance with the relevant sections of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. It cannot choose to do nothing. Hackney Carriage Fares and taxi licence fees have not formally been reviewed since 2015. There have been significant increases in associated costs for both the trade and the licensing department during that period. There have been significant increases in associated costs for the taxi trade. The trade has seen increases in running costs, including but not limited to fuel, insurance, vehicle, wages and maintenance cost, with no increase in income from fares to cover these costs. The private hire and Hackney carriage trays offer a valuable service to the residents of Breckland, where often there is no public transport in the form of regular buses, etc. The taxi licence fees, the council have fully reviewed the anticipated costs associated with granting, renewing and maintaining compliance of the taxi licensing function. And the proposed licence fees have been set accordingly so that the licence fees are based on full cost recovery, ensuring that Breckland Council taxpayer does not subsidise the taxi trade. Any lower fees would mean that we are not meeting the costs and a budget deficit. Any higher fees may result in a profit, and this would be potentially unlawful. The expected benefits are that with the Hackney Carriage Fares, that the taxi trade will be able to increase their fares up to the maximum set out in the proposed fares. This will allow them to recover the costs of licensing and maintaining their vehicles and operators' licenses and support the local economy. With the taxi licensing fees, the expected benefits are that the council will receive the full cost of granting, renewing and maintaining compliance of the taxi licensing function with no cost to the taxpayer. So as a final recommendation, it is recommended that the licensing committee review the responses received on the proposed increase in both taxi licensing fees and Hackney carriage fares, and agree and approve the final taxi licensing fees and Hackney carriage fares, and the date both will come into effect. And if I may add one thing that was added as part of the agenda reissue, on page 10 of the agenda, you will see Appendix 1 late paper, a new table of fares, which has come about from a meeting that was held on Friday, last Friday, the 18th of March 2022, here at the council offices with the taxi trade to discuss the current situation with Hackney carriage fares and taxi licensing fees. This was because there has been, obviously, since the Ukrainian war, a massive hike in everything, cost of living and fuel charges. So we wanted to have another consultation with them prior to this committee meeting. 8 members of the licensed trade attended the meeting. Discussion was had around the increase in fuel costs and the general cost of living since the report was written, and the trade has expressed concern for their livelihoods. The majority of the trade present agreed a new proposal for the fare tariff chart, which is attached as Appendix 1 on page 10 to the agenda. The trade that was present at the meeting on the 18th of March would like the licensing committee to consider this fare tariff chart as part of their response to the consultation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Josie. That was very comprehensive. And can I just thank you as well for having and facilitating that meeting with the drivers on Friday, because I think that was something that they needed to express face to face. And I'm very pleased to say that Breckland has listened and has come up with a solution to some of their worries. So can I move on then to have a proposer and a seconder for the item on the agenda, please? No, I haven't got a proposer for the, yes, absolutely. Oh, can you put your microphone on, please, Linda? Sorry.
Just for a moment's reassurance before we go into this, are the officers quite satisfied that the proposals put forward are manageable, this new page 10? Thank you.
Yes, please, Josie.
Yes, the officers of the licensing team are actually in agreement with the trade on this. We think that their proposal is fair and proportionate given today's circumstances, and that we anticipate that the fare review would not take place again for another 3 years.
Linda, it's also the fares are actually a maximum price. They don't have to charge that. So individual drivers can still, be competitive within that level. So that is only the maximum fare. Any other questions? So, Linda?
Are we at the moment voting on the fares alone or on the fees as well?
Is it right?
That's what I thought.
Right.
So the recommendations are separate, and they are on page, bear with me, sorry. They are on page 6 of the agenda. I do have, Madam Chairman, if it's okay, I did receive one response from a taxi operator who attended the meeting on Friday, who has asked if you would allow me to read his email out.
Yes.
Because he considered what had happened at the meeting, and I think it's only fair that his comments be put forward.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
fine.
Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay, so I'm not going to name the person, but this is the email. I will be totally honest about the meeting. I think some were getting carried away with the unrealistic prices for the meter. And another point I have is that in Breckland, there are only a few companies that work town and not subsidised by Norfolk County Council. At our company, we want to do what is best for the public that use us on a daily basis. Plus, if you were taking away the Norfolk County Council contract, how many of those companies would still exist, keeping all their drivers and vehicles going just based on town work? The answer is none. None of them could remain as they are. So that's why I recommend a £4.50 increase, as in the flag drop, plus 25 pence a mile, to be reviewed every 2 years. That's where I stand with the increase. I won't read the last comment, but there was a small comment on the end. Thank you for allowing me to read that out.
That's fine. Thank you, Josie. Any other comments or questions? Claire?
That actually sounds more reasonable to me. And also, could there be, if we're going to go with what's being recommended, could there be a review sooner than 3 years, given the circumstances,
Josie?
global, etc.?
We can review it sooner than 3 years. The reason that we've traditionally, previously to this long period, have done it every 3 years is because there are associated on costs to the trade every time we do a Hackney Carriage Fare review. Just to put into context, this last press notice that we had to put into the EDP was a considerable cost, and obviously there's officer time and all of that would have to be taken into account. So it would mean that the trade would have an increase in their Hackney, in their fees, basically, in their licence fees, every time we do a Hackney Carriage Fair review. So we did discuss this with them, and in the main, those that were present on Friday were happy with a 3-year review. It gave them some stability to actually know what they could increase to over that time. But I think it's a fair point. Thank you.
Tristan.
Just following on from that, is there the facility that if something happens like we're experiencing at the moment, that you can circumvent that 3-year review? You can't.
Sorry, yes, we could circumvent the 3-year review. That's not set in stone. That's just something we have done previously, and I would anticipate that that's where we would go to. But what you have to be aware of is we always have to go out to consultation as per those sections of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and we have to advertise. So there is no quick fix, shall we say, which is why we reviewed those fees on Friday in light of where we are today, because when the report was written in December, January, we weren't in the circumstances that we find ourselves in today.
Tristan, do you want to come back to that?
Well, just to echo what Claire said, I'm bearing in mind the response you've had back from the trade now and everything that's in the report. I'm comfortable with the £5. I'm less comfortable with the 30p because that is quite a big lift. And probably all the consultation responses, I think, or nearly all of them, referred to the fact that there hadn't been a proposed increase in that 20p, and 25p seems to be a little bit more manageable, both to take into account the additional costs for the sector, but also the fact that we've got rising costs for the people who are paying the fares as well.
Josie, do you want to fill in with that? Personally, I will say just something first. The cost of fuel is so expensive at the moment. The profit margin on any driver is minimal, is going down when costs are going up. So that covers this massive increase. And again, we can look, you know, that might not go up in the future. That might, it gives them that benchmark to charge that. They don't have to charge that much. Again, am I right with that?
That is correct. So this is the maximum. This is what will show on the meter. But any driver can agree to charge less than what is on the meter. What they cannot do is charge more than what is on the meter. So as I say, this was when we had the meeting on Friday, it was to discuss where we were today in the current climate and to look at where we could potentially be in 2 to 3 years' time, given that the government is saying that fuel prices could go up to £2 a litre. And obviously the associated on cost for everybody with the cost of living at the moment. So I think we had a very big discussion around the fact that this was the maximum that could be charged, because there's a very fine balance in Breckland with obviously those that work in the towns and just how rural our district is. And we're kind of unique because we have 5 market towns, which obviously generate a lot of people living inside them, and they're all growing and developing, but we do still have a massive rural community. So it was about getting that balance of having the initial flag price, which was for your first mile, but also there being, for those people who have to do the longer distances, a sensible increase that would allow them to actually recoup their costs, because they didn't feel that the £1.40 increase on the £3.60 flag drop, that really only would benefit those who were in the towns, and they were the ones who least wanted to have the increase because they like to be able to help the people that they run on a regular daily basis to and from the shops and to and from the doctors and the dentists.
Susan, did you have your hand up before?
Yes, I did. I think Tristan raised most of the points I was going to, but I just wanted to say that obviously a lot of the documentation we've got here has been superseded by the new discussions, and I just think it's important that the situation is very fluid, isn't it? So I think we do need to sort of keep an eye on what's happening.
So I've got here recommendations, and I think we're going to take them on 2 blocks, one for the fares and one for the fees. So it is recommended that the licensing committee review the responses received on the proposed increase in both taxi licensing fees and Hackney Carriage fares, but we'll do the fees first, if that's all right. If there isn't, sorry, fares first. Right, okay, thank you, Josie. So the committee, after consideration of the objections for Hackney Carriage fares, make no changes to the proposed table of fares and approve and set a date for the new Hackney Carriage fares to come into force. We can make modification to the proposed table of fares and approve and set a date for the new Hackney Carriage fares to come into force. So the recommendation is, do we accept the proposed increase in fares?
Madam Chairman, may I just
Yeah,
be,
and if I could draw your attention to, it shows on this flyer that you've been given around, the actual, if I hold it up here, it breaks it down as to what it is now, what the consultation went out to, what the initial response to the trade was, and what is proposed by this slight increase to what the trade actually wanted. So in actual fact, you know, the benchmark is there, but again, to reiterate, they don't have to charge that much. That is just set as a umbrella. Josie, did you have something to come back there?
yeah, so it was just for clarity really on that point. So the proposed charges are the ones on that say consultation on that document, the £5 plus 20 pence. And if you were to change it, it's obviously your consideration for whatever you want it to be, but the proposal from the trade is the change, which is the proposed by change on that, by the trade on that chart. So I think it's just to be clear which
Yeah,
is which.
which
So-
one you're actually going for,
Yeah.
to be fair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Whichever, this is the options we have in front of us here. We either go with what the consultation was, the initial response by the trade, or what we are proposing in response to what the trade have come back for. So,
Or something else.
or anything else that you may have. But I personally like the last one on that list because that gives them the ability to go under. Tristan,
Can I therefore make a alternative proposal then,
yes?
based on what I said earlier?
Yeah.
And that would be £5 and 25 pence.
Do I have a seconder for that? All in favour of that, of £5 and 25 pence? Any against? Yeah, they're going for 5, they're changing their vote. But this is a separate proposal by Tristan, £5 and 25. Yeah. Well, it hasn't yet. It might still. Right, this is getting a bit confusing. So the proposal on the table is £5 and 25 pence. Can we accept that? Yeah. And the seconder, Claire, for that. All in favour of that proposal? 2, 3. Against? No abstentions. Right, so can we have a proposer for the £5 and 30 pence? Do I have a seconder? Susan? All in favour of that? 4, 5. Against? Abstentions, none. Okay, that motion's carried then for the £5 and 30 pence. Again, I reiterate for the public, that is a maximum fare and that drivers can still be competitive underneath, but that then covers them for any exponential rising costs. Yeah, can we put a date for that, please? It has to be after the 1st of April. Within 2 months.
Madam Chairman, if I may, just to give you some information on that, meter manufacturers need a minimum of 2 weeks to do the update and get those updates to their agents. So if I may propose a couple of dates that are different to the 1st of April, which was the recommended date, either the 8th or the 15th of April. I feel that it needs to be sooner rather than later, so that the drivers may start charging an increased fare on what they currently have. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yeah. So what date would you all agree to? 8th or the 15th? Is that a proposal? Yeah. Seconder for the 8th? Yeah, all in favour of the 8th? Linda, are you against? Yeah, okay. There was no abstentions, was there? No, okay, that's carried then for the 8th of April. Yep. So then we move on to the taxi licence fees. We can either make no changes to the proposed taxi licence fees and approve and set a date for the new fees to come into force, or make modification to the proposed taxi fees and approve and set a date for the new taxi licence fees to come into force. Tristan.
Can I just ask what the asterisks are for?
Josie?
I had some other information on there that isn't pertinent to what was in here. It's for my personal use, so I apologise that they're still on there. So please ignore the asterisk.
Well spotted, Tristan. Any other questions regarding that? Linda, and then Tristan. Microphone, Linda, sorry.
Sorry, I'm
I
usually
can
better
hear
than
you, but
this.
the public can't.
I'm concerned about some of the discrepancies and some of the very steep rises. I appreciate that comparing current with proposed on some of these is not straightforward, because the DBS checks are added just as plus DBS rather than a fee. So I can't tell how much it currently costs. But I am a bit surprised that, I'm trying to find the place, taxi driver grant and renewal are identical proposals, but Hackney carriage vehicle grant and renewal, there's a difference. There's a difference in renewing, you get it £10 cheaper, and in any case, Hackney driver is cheaper than taxi driver. Could that be explained, please?
I'll ask Josie to answer that for you. She
And
has
I
the
shall ask
information here.
again, if I may, on the question of the private hire operator grant and renewal, what is included? Just so you know my other question. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Josie?
Okay, I think I got that. I just had to grab my agenda back, so apologies for that. Okay, so the reason that the driver grant and renewal are the same is because there are more checks to do on the same checks to do time and time again on the taxi driver grant and renewal. With the Hackney carriage vehicle and the private hire vehicles, the mechanism for doing that is much faster on a renewal, primarily because all of the information is already entered, and generally the vehicle hasn't changed because they would be putting it on as a new grant if that were the case. We make much closer checks. That sounds, actually, that's probably not the correct way to put it, but the checks that we do on taxi drivers are much more prolific, and there are a lot more of them these days. We now have to do HMRC checks to make sure that they're registered for tax, etc. So that's why the renewal and the grant came out the same on that. But there's a slight decrease on the Hackney carriage also because we don't issue side stickers on a renewal. They don't get any of those. We are giving them to them for free if they need replacement ones because of wear and tear. So it's a cost that's been taken off it. With the private hire renewal, again, it's less because we've already got the vehicle details on there. It's a much faster process, which is why it's less to do the renewal. Was the other question about the operator? Sorry.
Yes.
It has.
The operator renewal grant and renewal are the same price. It may be the same checks, but the difference between current and proposed is over 200%, something like that, or over 100%.
Yeah,
I can't work
Josie,
it out.
Josie can answer that.
Okay, Madam Chairman, thank you. Yes, you're absolutely correct. They are substantial increases on the private hire operators. There are a number of factors for that. To the drivers, I described it as a double whammy, but it's probably more than a double whammy. The issue that we have is that the fee should have been reviewed in 2015 to increase from a 3-year licence grant to a 5-year licence grant. So when these fees were reviewed in July 2015, it was a 3-year licence. In October, November that year, the government, in their wisdom, decided to make that a 5-year licence, and that became law. So we were issuing and have been issuing 5-year licenses at a 3-year license price because the fee had never been reviewed since 2015. So we've got that on the one side. So the comparison that's on the chart that was handed out this morning is that had that fee increased, they would have been paying, it would have equated to, so in my calculations, you divide what the current fee is by 3 and times it by 5 to get a 5-year price. That's just a basic level because obviously there were no checks and things involved in that. That would have then come out at £240.75. I agree there's still a considerable increase. The reason for that is that alongside the change from 3 to 5-year license with no fee increase, we also have all of the changes from the DFT standards that mean that we have to undertake regular checks on operator records, and there are many additional checks. Previously, we only ever checked the records if there was a complaint, so the proportion of the compliance cost, if you like, there weren't any previously in the previous license fee. There was no compliance cost in there at all. We're now going to have to undertake many, not just checks on granting of licenses, but also actually going and checking their records. Now, for some people, they might be a one-man band and only have their own vehicle. Many of those one-man bands, however, do have a couple of school contracts. Then you have your operators who have 5 or 6 vehicles in their own fleet and also subcontract out to other people. They have to keep records on every single one of those jobs that they take in. They also now have to have policies if they are employers. So we will have to be going out and checking all of the policies to make sure they're adhering to all of the conditions on the license that have come from those DFT changes. And that's all work that we haven't had to do previously. And again, it's about ensuring that the taxpayer is not paying for that work to be done. It's not subsidising it. So it is substantial, but they have been hit by a double whammy. It's unfortunate, and I did apologise to the trade on Friday. It's not their fault. To be fair, it's not the team's fault, the current team's fault either. It should have been done and wasn't. We're now trying to rectify everything with all the policies that we're amending and with the fees and fares. And as I explained to the trade on Friday, I was tasked obviously with the checking and looking at reviewing the fees. And I did say to management that I wasn't prepared to do that unless we did the fares as well, because I understand how much is going to hit them. So I am about fairness. It's not, I have looked at these in fairness and they have been worked out to the absolute cost recovery. I hope that gives you some sort of explanation.
Thank you, Josie. And can I just, before I take you, Mike, just point out there, and I was quite surprised myself, there's 38 operators. So it's not all the taxi drivers that would have to pay that. It's 38 individuals. Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll try and turn it around and look at it from the other side. I understand the justification, Josie, and thanks for putting the argument so clearly. I understand where we're coming from as a council, that effectively we're wanting to pass the costs on. From time to time, a taxi driver or a private hire driver retires or gives up for whatever reason and needs replacing. So we do need to keep new people coming into the business. Is there any evidence that the kind of sums we're talking up as a kind of setup fee, this is what I have to pay in order to get my first fare, is going to put people off? Are people saying, I mean, the existing drivers don't face that kind of situation quite in the same way, and they're speaking for themselves. They're not necessarily speaking for people new to the business who they might not know. I mean, they're just non-people at the moment. So do we have any concerns that we will be able to attract people into the business, given that this might be seen as rather an off-putting hurdle for people to start before they've earned their first fare?
You happy for me to answer that, Madam
Yes,
Chairman? Thank
thank
you. So I understand completely where you're coming from. We've actually sat down and thought about that as well. Are we going to see a big reduction? Yes, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think we will see a reduction in the one-man bands. However, a Hackney Carriage vehicle, once licensed, can take pre-bookings. So there is an option for those one-man bands not to operate as a private hire operator and that would mean that they wouldn't need to keep records because they are a Hackney Carriage vehicle. They can actually operate as a Hackney Carriage vehicle and only take pre-bookings. They don't have to go and sit on the rank. Any Hackney Carriage vehicle can take a pre-booking. So the difference would be that as long they wouldn't be able to go over the meter price. That would be where it was tailed at the moment, whereas private hire operators are not capped. They can charge pretty much whatever they want. But if it's a pre-booking and an agreed fare, so long as it didn't go over the meter price, they would be fine.
And they can fly from the street, can't they?
They can, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they can actually cruise the streets to get work too.
Yeah, because that's what the Hackney Carriage is.
Yes, Mike.
Mate, there are in my town, a relatively big town, Thetford, there are taxi ranks there as you described. For example, one at the bus station and one at the railway station. It is frequently a case that there's no one there. No, particularly the bus station. It's very little use as far as I can see. Does that imply, and I think you might have half answered the question, Madam Chairman, that that kind of arrangement is less important or less significant to the driver's earnings? In other words, people are not actually going to a rank in order to sit and wait and hope. They are actually perhaps more relying, and perhaps we're encouraging them more to rely on effectively what's private hire, with people making arrangements to have a taxi. Is that a fair comment?
So I think that's absolutely fair comment. I think we've seen a very big shift in the way that people book taxis these days. A few people still obviously show up at the train station expecting to see a taxi, and at most major train stations would probably be able to. However, for the most part, we've all seen Uber and the likes of Uber and many apps coming on board. I think there has been a shift. We've seen a slight decrease in the number of drivers that we have. Generally, I've been here 15, 16 years now. Generally, we've always been around the 220 to 250 mark. 250 has been the absolute max. We don't cap, but that's been the max of drivers that we've had. So we have seen, you're absolutely right, we have seen a decline. Over COVID, generally, the 20 or so that we've lost have generally been on the cusp of retiring, and through the COVID period decided that that was the time that they would make their move and retire. I can't say for certain whether it's going to have a massive impact or not on whether Hackney carriages will show up at those ranks or not, because obviously it's down to the trade to man those. I know we have a few issues with nighttime economy as well, with taxis being there. But what I would say is the checks and measures that are coming into place and are now in place with the taxi policy that we implemented and the committee implemented mean that you have to be professional to do this job. And I think you would agree that you need to be professional to do this job. It's no longer a case of, I can't get a job doing anything else, so therefore I'll become a taxi driver. These guys are very professional in what they do. They provide a very valuable service, and we want to make sure that that service is there for years to come. I think when you break down the fees, yes, it's quite shocking, the private hire operator fee initially, but when you actually break that down over the 5 years, that's 165, sorry, I've got the wrong one there. Let me go back up here. The year is £83. I kind of liken it to, and I don't know if I'm right in doing this, especially in committee, but I liken it to the street trading operators. So the people that go out there and sell burgers and coffees and things like that on a street trading license, they're paying £408 a year for their license. So that's just a comparison. This has been costed to be cost recovery. I don't know how else I can answer the question, does that?
Yeah.
A stranger or a person who's not living in Thetford, no more than that, takes Thetford because of the particular situation, hops off the London train or the London coach. There is no taxi in the rank, which is normal. So they phone. Now, we've got a mobile phone, so it's not difficult to phone. But who do they phone? As far as I'm aware, my memory is there are no adverts on the bus station which tell you where to phone, and the train station's got one advert for, is it LJ? I forget. So there's no joined up writing in terms of saying, when you got off our train, when you got off our coach, this is what you do next. I just wonder whether there's any hope that for the various reasons that you mentioned, we're getting less people less drivers on the ranks, but we are also getting more groups of drivers rather than individuals. Is there some way we can get round that issue and say to people, say to drivers, in fact, we don't really need you on ranks because there's an alternative way of people getting hold of you? That's
Advertising.
I think that's, sorry, I think that's going to be a matter for the individual operators. It's not
Yeah.
something as a,
That
so
it,
really they need all to advertise, or
I think it's down, it's down to,
How-
I'm assuming that
sorry,
the,
how do they tell? How do they tell the public? How do the public access them at a moment when the public is stuck?
Mike, I think I can answer that in individual operators, individual drivers, one-man bands or big companies. It's down to them individually to advertise. I can only assume that if there isn't a blanket of advertising in a particular area, it's because they are already inundated with pre-contracts, things like that, and are busy. If they want work and they need work, they'll advertise and get the work because it's obviously there. The towns are growing and the work is and will increase. So I would, Breckland, I would like to see possibly advertised to the one-man bands that want to come on board, that it's not necessarily an operator's license they need with a PHV, a private hire license. It's, they can go as a Hackney carriage and not pay so much. So when I'd like to see the team, perhaps when anybody turns up and says, I want a license, you don't have to have it because it is quite difficult differentiating between PH and Hackney carriage, and I know the system, but it's still quite difficult in different areas. Every area has a different way of working. So I think it would be good to, possibly to put it out there to advertise that is a good job. And it's not a end of the road job, pardon the pun, it is a career of choice to many drivers. And, I know a lot of our local drivers in my town are professional beyond reproach. And they go over and above and provide more than just driving Mrs. Smith to Tesco's and back. So, I think I'd like to see Breckland encourage more drivers out there. And again, steer them, if they're the little guy, to the cheaper option of setting himself up. And then advertise to the bigger guys that want to, be a proper big operator, that, that's the cost. And when you break it down, the actual costs per day are quite negligible. 81 pence per day on the bottom figure there, driver 22 and vehicle 59. So, and that is for, that's quite manageable in that respect. It sounds a lot, but yeah, I'm with Josie and her reasons on that. Hope that answers your question, Mike. Sorry, it went on a bit. Yes, good.
I'm still a bit obsessed about the person who arrives in the town with a phone and says, okay, so what I need to do now, because there are no physical adverts around, because the town doesn't want them plastered all over the bus station, or because if people don't choose to advertise or whatever, don't think it's worthwhile, they've been vandalised, whatever. Can I find on my phone a choice of 3 or 4?
Yes,
Can I?
yes.
Okay.
You can Google, sadly, when you get off anywhere these days, you can hold your phone up and Google and it pops up with taxis local to where you are. So that is, that does happen. I've done it myself many times in different areas. Thank you, Mike. Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, I want to just jump back a point, and that is to the actual fees. We have, and I have been involved with officers over many weeks now in assessing these fees that are charged, and it is a huge increase in the private hire operator, but it is, we have to, by law, operate on a no profit basis. We are not recovering fees from an error that was made 7 years ago, which means we have been charging lower fees. And the fee is reasonable. When it's broken down on the piece of paper you were given today as 22 pence a day, that is a reasonable cost for a fee. And the increase in fees on an average taxi driver, I think we worked out, would be recovered in about 7 or 8 days driving. So with average fares. So I think it is something that we can't do very much about. We can only gain that amount of money through in 2 ways. One, charging the person who's operating the business, and 2, charging the taxpayer. And the decision made was that the burden should lie with the business, and it is 22 pence a day, £6.52 a week, or whatever. That's the amount that £6.52 a month, I should say, not a week. My maths were never good, but they aren't that bad. So I think that's something that I did just want to make clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Tristan?
Just picking up on this cost per day. My personal opinion is I'm not comfortable with breaking things down to cost per day, because I've got absolutely no idea how much I earn per day and how relevant that is. So to me, that is trying to make it look like it's not a lot, but context is everything. And I don't know whether that is a lot to a driver or not. What I think is a lot is a 50% increase in anything and a 72% increase in anything. So I'm just wondering, is it feasible to phase this in over a 3-year period?
Thank you, Tristan. Josie?
I will leave that to Gordon to answer, if that's okay, because that's it's a cabinet matter, really.
Thank you, Gordon.
Well, that's a proposal that you can make. We did consider it at the time, and we felt that it was right that a fee for a license should be a fee for a license. And we didn't phase it in. If you want to make a proposal that we consider that, then that's something that I would take back to Cabinet and see.
Tristan?
Well, I don't know whether we've exhausted the conversation as to whether I put a proposal. I would put that proposal if the timing's right. Because without pointing fingers to anybody, obviously Breckland has made an error over this. And I think to then, it's not a punishment because it would be the correct price, what is presented on here. But to give that all in one lump of 50%, 72% and 70% is quite a lot when businesses like to plan. And I think if you was to phase it over a 3-year period, it gives businesses, sole traders, etc., the ability to plan better than what they currently have got, where all of a sudden, you know, back in January, they found out that some of these costs were going to go up by quite a significant amount without the whole Ukraine situation as well.
Would you like to make that a proposal? But I must point out that we would have to agree amounts. All right, well, yeah.
Yeah, I'd happily make that proposal over the 3-year period so that that would tie in with the next review.
Okay. Josie first, then Vera.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I think I have 2 comments from that, if that's okay. So it is the intention that fees will be reviewed annually going forwards. As I say, I can only apologise what's happened previously. That was out of my control. So they will be reviewed annually. I'm hoping that the vast changes that we are making with the inroads to web forms and the systems that we are using will mean that when we review these in, I don't want to say next year, but hopefully in 2 years' time, we're going to review these next year anyhow, but I would anticipate it's a 2-year programme for the changes that we are making to the IT system, and with web forms and everything coming on board. If the trade accepts those web forms and starts using those to go directly into our system going forward, we're not at that stage yet. I must reiterate, we're not at that stage yet, but hopefully we will be going forward. I would anticipate there would be obviously a reduction in that portion of that fee. So that's why they need to be reviewed annually. Also, the associated costs could change. They could go up, they could go down. If we don't do as many investigations one year, we will see things dip. I guess the second comment I have is the converse reaction to Tristan's proposal, is that we did look at that. We did look at whether we could phase it in, because I was kind of like, well, that would be, you would think, the sensible approach. The problem is with the operators, well, with all of them, where do you start and where do you end? Because at some point you're penalising somebody. So if I have an operator that renews this year and say we only did a 25% incremental increase, but next year we did a 50% on today's rate, the person who renews next year is going to say, well, I can just go for a new license this year and take the 5-year license and take that hit. Do you see what I mean? There's never going to be a good time to do it. And I think you're always going to affect somebody. And I am fearful that obviously we're under a review at the moment as a department. We do need the fees to cover the fees, the cost of running the service.
Vera, then Linda.
I understand where Councillor Ashby's coming from, but where would the shortfall come? How would the shortfall be made up? What budget would that come from?
The worry here, Vera, would be that it would cost the taxpayer, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Yeah, Linda.
I'm looking at this and wondering if there's another way we can help the taxi driver. The bottom line of the proposed taxi licensing fees seems to me to relate to one-offs, and I see no problem with that. It's the top half of the page where some of these are very big figures to deal with. Just remind us, a taxi driver grant, a Hackney Carriage vehicle grant, private hire vehicle grant, what period do they last, each of them? We know the 5 years for the operator, because we've just been talking
It
about.
does say on there, so the Hackney Carriage private hire driver renewal, if you're looking at this one. It does say-
Sorry, yes, it's on the new page. Thank you. So one is a 3-year license, the operator is a 5. Yes, and the vehicle is a 1 year. What I was wondering is whether where it's a 3-year or a 5-year license, there would be an option for a driver to pay on a yearly basis or a quarterly basis by direct debit or something, as long as we have a firm agreement. Is there any possibility to do that, or do you think that's really too risky?
Josie?
Sorry, you probably saw me shaking my head then. We had a similar situation with the street traders a while back, where they were on monthly payments, and it was payments, not direct debits. However, we weren't successful in managing that system. I would have grave concern that we are giving out a 3-year license or a 5-year license, and somebody hasn't actually paid for that upfront. I think the comparison for us would be, you couldn't go to the passport office and ask for a 10-year passport and expect to pay for that over the next 10 years. So I'm sorry, I have to give you some kind of comparison that we would use in our analogy. So I think we would be opening ourselves up to an increased cost, definitely an increased amount of work that we simply don't have the staff and the resource to do at the moment. So we would see an increase in the fee if we were to go down that route. So it's, yeah.
Is it possible, Josie, for 1-year license, i.e. for a driver that possibly coming up for retirement and just wanted a 1-year license?
So in our policy, we have said that if a driver, and it is driver only, requires only a 1-year license, they need to write to us, put it in writing why they only require a 1-year license. What we haven't yet done is worked out a cost because we've never had that request.
But could that be something that the team could look at as?
I think we could do it potentially. As I say, it's there in the policy for those kind of circumstances. What we don't want to get into, however, is a driver applying for a 1-year license year on year on year.
Yeah.
Because the associated costs of producing that license and
Exactly
actually
would be more.
they would.
Okay, thank you, Josie. Gordon, you had your hand up, sorry.
Well, I did. I was just going to say, I mean, I think Josie has actually dealt with everything well. Thank you, Josie. I think, I mean, whilst I am, as I said, willing to take this proposal back and consider it, I personally wouldn't think it was viable. I think what Josie said right at the end about comparing it to a passport was quite valid. I'm sorry, I didn't think of that myself. But it is a license. It's a license to operate, and it's a license to operate in an area where the public were involved heavily. And I think as soon as we start reducing the standards, I think we then start reducing the quality of the applicants we're going to get, and so on and so forth. I think my opinion is if you're setting up a business as a private hire operator with a car, this is a fee that you have to take consideration of. We're not asking people to renew their licenses early, at least I don't think we are. If the license is there, it's there. So this would be for new licenses as they come along. And whilst I'm willing to take it back, if the committee asks me to be reconsidered, I think if we do that, it ought not to affect the fares thing. And I don't know whether there's a way around that, but I personally wouldn't be supporting it.
Tristan.
Make one last pitch, even though I don't think I've got the room. So just picking up on the things that Jodie said, that if I've made my notes correctly. So we've seen approximately a 17% reduction in drivers. We all agree they're very professional. We all agree they provide a valuable service, but we're not going to support with regards to the impact of this fee. And I appreciate what Councillor Dale has said about any shortfall is made up by the taxpayer, but that's been happening for 7 years. And this would reduce that shortfall, as well as support the drivers.
I think that's why we wanted to make sure that the fares were adequate to cover some of the costs, and it being slightly higher than originally proposed to try and offset some of that. But I can hear what you're saying, Tristan. So it's just unfortunate that we are where we are with covering the cost and not making the taxpayer pay for it. It's not the best situation, but we're trying to make the most and the best of it as we possibly can. And I think the reduction of the drivers is more to do with COVID, because I know London has been hit hard with lack of drivers. Drivers had to go back to original jobs or other jobs and have got comfortable and are not going back yet. But I think we will see that rise again as the work increases on the street. Yeah, fingers crossed. Yes, Mike.
I'm just reflecting on this business of paying 5 years in advance. When I started out as a teacher, you had to give 2 months' notice. As a head teacher, I had to give 3 months' notice. As a driver of a taxi or a licensed, I have to say to myself, this is a 5-year job. Otherwise, I'm paying money that I'm not going to make use of. That does sound pretty tough to me. And at the time, I hope you're right that the 17% decrease is COVID related. Because if there was no, dare I say, excuse, we'd be quite worried, wouldn't we, at a 17% change, a negative change?
It's definitely COVID related.
Well, I hope we'll make a recovery. Either they've got to come back or someone's got to take their place. Or we'll simply have fewer drivers. Perhaps we've got too many drivers at the moment. I don't know, but I'm surprised if we have. So I'm just, again, I'm trying to say, we don't want to put people off joining the trade. And I can't quite see the logic in saying, you've never done this before, but you're making a commitment for 5 years. That's a hell of a long time to make a commitment for something you've not done before, isn't it?
Tracy.
If I can go back to the passport analogy, which I know possibly doesn't seem relevant, but the fee is for operating. It's not our choice whether you choose to do it for 1 year or 5 years. You go into it knowing that is the fee. You can't go to the passport office and say, well, I need a 10-year license because that's all you issue, but I'm only going to use it twice. So can I have a reduction, or can I just pay for 2 years of that license? That's the only analogy I can give you that in my head makes sense. It may not, I apologize if it doesn't to anybody else, because my head does work differently to most people. But I think you have to go into this knowing that if you want to do this professionally, there are fees involved in it. For me personally, I also deal with the Licensing Act side of things. And when they go into running a pub, They know that there are associated costs with that. They know that there is a license fee and an annual fee that goes with that. And this is no different. This is what you have to pay in order to run this type of business. And I don't think it's any different in any kind of business, regardless of what you do, whether it's alcohol or whether it's a cake making business, et cetera, et cetera. There are associated startup costs, associated costs for those licenses that are needed for this. I agree it's a substantial increase, but I think it's for you to decide whether the taxpayer should be paying anything towards it and how you justify that, or whether we go for the full cost recovery. And I'll leave Gordon if he needs to interject there.
Yeah, I'll have Gordon, then Susan and Linda. Gordon.
Well, I was just going to say, it is cost neutral. It's what it costs the council to issue that licence. And we are not making a profit on it. We are charging what it costs this council to issue that licence. That licence now does last for 5 years. So once a person has got it, they can operate for 5 years. If they choose not to, that's the decision they must make. And we couldn't influence it, but they do have permission to operate as a private hire vehicle operator for 5 years. And our costs are not spread over the period. Well, most of them are not. There are certain checks that have to come in which are covered by that, but most of the costs are in fact upfront to this council, I think.
Before I take the floor, can I just ask one question? Could you possibly explain to the committee what being an operator actually does more than just being a private hire driver or a Hackney carriage driver, what that extra bit is for, and why would I want to be an operator if I was to do it? Does that make sense?
Yes, Madam Chairman, thank you. So in order to have a private hire vehicle and to operate private hire vehicles, you have to be a private hire operator. So the main difference for the majority of our operators is they're not generally one-man bands. In each market town, we have 2 or 3 private hire operators. They often run a mix of Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles. So you have a choice. You can, as a one-man band, decide no longer to be a private hire operator and transfer your, well, not transfer, but you would have to apply for a new license on your vehicle as a Hackney carriage. Now, the biggest difference between the 2 vehicles is the specification is generally the same, but you do have to have a meter and a top light. The experience that I have is that some people do not want for resale value because it does potentially downgrade the resale value of their vehicles. They have not wanted to put a top light and a meter, have those installed in their vehicles previously. But it is a consideration, it is an option for them. Many of the private hire operators do have school contracts, especially the bigger operators, the ones who have 5 or 6 of their own people that they employ. I've kind of lost the thread there a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, if I as a driver wanted to pay less next year, I could opt to go Hackney carriage and put a light on my roof and pay less, but still do this meter and still do the same job as I was doing before and be pre-bookable.
Yes.
Does that clear that up for the floor? Is it clear? Yeah, good. Susan, you had your hand up, then Linda. Thank you,
Chair. Whilst I've heard everyone's arguments about this, I do think it's totally justified in the costs and so on for what we need to do. But I think what's overtaken events is the situation at the moment. And I just think that's a very large increase for people when fuel is rising all the time and it's going to continue to rise. They have got, and other bills are going up. And I just think it's possibly not the right time for us to be putting it up so much. And if there is any other way we can do it by, just reducing the fees in that particular area of the 5-year license, I think that will help people, because otherwise it just looks like we're not caring very much about the effects on the individual operators and the drivers.
Thank you, Susan. Linda? Mike?
Thank you. Your questions answered most of what I wanted to ask. What I'm concerned about is school contracts and such like things. If you're a small operation, one-man band or possibly two, can you operate as a Hackney Carriage driver? And can you get, as that, can you get school contracts? So we've got to pay the operator fee to be somebody who can take on a regular contract.
That's actually a question for Norfolk County Council. My understanding is that there are some Hackney Carriage drivers out there who have tendered for contracts and do have them, but it is a tendering process, and that would be down to the Norfolk County Council Transport Division to make that decision.
Any other questions before we go to the recommendations? No. So the recommendations are that we, Tristan, are you gonna? Did you?
Yeah, I'll propose phasing in over a 3-year period, which ties in with the next 3-year review period.
I think with that proposal, I think we just need to be clear, I think, in terms of amounts per year. Because otherwise I'm not sure how we work out who's going to pay what year 1, 2, and then 3. And I'm not sure do we have that information?
Would that make the associated costs more? That's my only worry, with officer time, etc.
I have lost the plot completely.
Yeah.
Right. So we are looking at, are
Mike,
we looking at
put your
every
mic,
fee?
Mike.
Sorry. Are we looking at every fee to do an incremental increase
Or
over,
just the operators?
or just the operators? I think we need to be clear on that.
So where it's the driver renewal, which is currently 50% increase, where we're talking about the operator, which is a 72% increase, and where we're talking about a HC vehicle 1-year license, which is a 70%. Sorry, that's 1 year, isn't it? Yeah, no, the first 2. So the proposal would be 33 1/3% whenever it's coming in, due to come in. Following year is another, so that by the time you get to the 3-year review, it's already been in for a full year.
But it's a 5-year license, isn't it? So it would be 3 years to then go for another, for another 2.
The review every 3 years was going to be the fares. We are reviewing these fees on an annual basis because we have to, because they have to be cost recovery. So we could see an increase, we could see a decrease. And that would be the concern is, so somebody who, and I think this is where the difficulty comes in and where I battered my head against a brick wall, in all honesty. I understand fully where you're coming from. The concerns are twofold. Number one, how do we justify this to the rest of the taxpayers of Breckland Council, of which I'm one? And secondly, somebody is still going to end up in year 3 or in year 5 with a significantly increased fee. I'm struggling to understand how we're actually benefiting anybody at the moment.
The danger here, I think, Tristan, is if we pay less, or they pay less today on that fee, it could push the costs up more, so that when the next year, when we review the actual fees again, that could then make that cost in more. I think that would be the danger. Am I right with that, Josie? Yeah, it could put the fees up even more. So at the moment, if they pay that fee now, we will review it next year, and it could be that we've recovered some of the costs, and that particular operator's license could go down if the costs are coming down. Am I right in that? So it could go the other way.
So
This would be reviewed yearly. The fares that they can charge is every 3 years, but the fees is every year that we're reviewing. And the fees for that particular one is 5 years. And the Hackney carriages are 3 years. That's where it's very confusing with the operator's license is a 5-year license. So it is difficult to get your head around, but I'm just very worried that it would end up going the other way if we've not recovered the money on costs.
What, sorry, go the other way, I don't know.
Well,
what that means.
if we're not paying the money, if we're not covering the costs of producing and admin and all the rest of it to get the licenses out, if we're not covering it now, it's going to cost the taxpayer from today. So next year, when we review it on the fees, it could end up being that £415 might be £435 because we haven't recovered the costs from today. Does that make sense? Have I got the plot right?
I think it's a very difficult one, and I understand that it's a difficult decision. It does come back to where is the money going to come from? If it doesn't come from these fees, where is the money going to come from? Because we don't have a pot of money in licensing to cover this. So the taxpayer is going to have to pay that from somewhere, and somebody needs to let me know where that money is coming from, because I don't have it. My bosses don't have it. That's a decision for above my grade.
Gordon?
Yeah, I think this is a fee for a license, and I think we've been trying to link it to the fares. We have agreed that the fares should go up, and we have had consultations on that, and you have discussed whether the fees should go up, and you've made a decision today to recommend that they go up, and that they go up from a specific date. That's something that we have agreed with the trade that we will look at every 2 or 3 years, whatever it is that Josie has come to. The whole question of fees and fares is something that I've asked the team to look at on an annual basis. We do have to look at fees on an annual basis because we should be cost recovery. It should not be a burden upon the ratepayer. It should be a cost for the business running the business. And to do that fairly, we have to look at that every year. So next year, as you've said, it might be 435, it might equally be 385, it might have come down. We don't know, because the costs are a burden that are placed upon us by the natural inflation with whoever has to provide the service that gives us those costs. And of course, the government who says you have to include this cost or you don't have to include that cost. So I think it's very, very difficult. And as I said, I'm happy to take this back, but I think it's going to be a very difficult and long conversation to work out how exactly we can do it.
Mike?
Pardon me, I hope I'm not being repetitive, Madam Chairman. Maybe you can answer this. Do you have confidence that either we have enough drivers or we can replace, under the new terms proposed of both fares and fees, the 17% that we've lost and any others we've lost? I know they've lost for COVID, but the fact is they're lost to the trade, whatever the reason they've gone. So are we doing enough to make sure that this business, as a general business, and bringing new people in is viable? Have we got enough drivers as a basic thing? And if not, what are we doing about it?
I would like to see more, to be honest. And I think that would be a nice advertising campaign, possibly. But that's something for a future council agenda, I would imagine, wouldn't it, Gordon? Or take it to cabinet to get some advertising out for more drivers. But I'm confident that with the level of work post-COVID, that more drivers would look or more people would look at this as an option of a career, because natural progression of work coming back. So I'm confident, and if the team are willing to advertise the different ways of getting it, and maybe clear some of the confusion for the drivers, would be helpful.
Are you happy for me to interject there? So,
Yes, please.
just to say that we have given that option where people have said, it's actually been the converse, believe it or not, previously, where people have wanted to come along and be licensed, but haven't wanted to put their meter and the top light on. That's when we've advised them to become private hire operators. And the irony is now we'll be obviously advising them to go the other way. With regards to numbers, I cannot make any guarantees about that. But what I can tell you is in the 15, almost 16 years that I've been here, market forces have kept it at a pretty similar figure. As I say, this is one of the lower ends of where we've been, but it's been here before and it will probably go there again. And one would hope that we would anticipate that we will be again somewhere between 230 and 250. But I don't control that. I don't control what's going on out there. I don't control that, you know, potentially Uber may come into the market, and that's a whole different facet to things. All I can tell you is what my experience is thus far for the 15, 16 years I've been here, and that is that market forces dictate the number of drivers and vehicles that are out there, and it has remained pretty steady through that period.
I'd agree with that.
Can I just add that in that case, I think we need something we perhaps need to keep under a more public review. Perhaps this committee needs to hear each year what the situation regarding numbers and the feeling that we've got enough, the appropriate number is.
Yeah, thank you, Josie. Any other questions or comments? Then I'm going to move to the recommendations that we either make no changes to the proposed taxi licence fees and approve and set a date for the new fees to come into force, or we make modifications to the proposed taxi licence fees and approve and set a date for the new taxi licence fees to come into force. Do I have a proposer for the first one? Yeah. Linda, do I have a seconder? Claire? All in favour? Those against? Okay, that motion is carried. And we need to set a date for that to come into force. Would committee be in agreement of it being the same day as the fees to coincide? The 8th of April? Are you happy with that? Was it the 8th we wrote down, wasn't it? It was the 8th. 8th. Are we happy with the 8th? Yeah. Is that all right for the team?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Right. That concludes today's business. I'd like to thank you all for that, and have a lovely day, and thank you to all who are watching, and hope it was all